Tonight on PhillyCAM Voices, we have a segment on a local jazz duo, the Baylor Project, a segment on the importance of the 2022 midterm election, and a live interview with Vic Walczak, the legal director at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Good evening, and thanks for tuning in to PhillyCAM Voices. I'm your host, Connie Komm. Reporter Toya Haynes talks to Philadelphia area based jazz duo, the Baylor Project, about how an off the cuff cautionary tale they jokingly made during quarantine garnered them their third Grammy nomination. Let's take a look at this segment.
At the end of 2019, Gene and Marcus Baylor, collectively known as the Baylor Project, had great expectations. They had concerts scheduled and plans to record a follow-up to their 2017 album, The Journey. However, like many of us, all of their plans came to a standstill upon the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. In 2020, an off-the-cuff tune, which began as a cautionary tale, turned into a viral sensation that earned them their third Grammy nomination. I spoke with the Baylor Project about the unexpected success of their song, as well as other career milestones they fortunately received in the midst of a pandemic.
Can you tell us about how the end of 2019 was for you? Like, what were you thinking as you had tour dates scheduled and everything? Can you kind of reflect back to that time of when things started to change, when you saw the tour dates start to drop? We thought this was going to be 3 weeks. Can you kind of go back to that time, how you felt?
Yes, I think weren't we supposed to be on a cruise the top of 2020 that got canceled, I believe, or maybe 2021. We were booked. We were really expecting for our bookings and live performances to continue to increase throughout 2020.
Right.
And we were supposed to we wanted to release Generations in 2020, but it just was not ready. So we just had to push it back. But I remember, the top of the year kind of like, okay, well, I think it was March, and we were like, what is this? And like you said, things started dropping off, couldn't get things on. We just had to just sit back and wait and let it breathe.
Our wedding anniversary is April 6th. And so we were thinking, man, we need to put out a single for the new album. We was trying to figure that out, but we were still, recording and figuring things out. And so what ended up happening is, while we were working on Generations, the pandemic hit. And we're literally writing for Generations. And it was, for us, in terms of just having some downtime and quiet time, it was actually perfect for us. But at the same time, those gigs got canceled, which was like, oh man, being able to have the finances and the resources.
One evening in March 2020, Marcus was watching the popular drama Ozark when he noticed some non-quarantine friendly behavior.
So I'm looking at the TV and I'm seeing people all in the swimming pool partying and having a good time during this time. And I'm like, oh my God, this pandemic has hit. And these people are down here partying for spring break. No mask, no nothing, everybody in the pool together. And I'm probably screaming at the television, maybe talking to a family member. And people need to sit down. What in the world is happening? They need to sit down, like, go home, relax. And so Jean is cooking in the kitchen, and she comes out the kitchen and she says, babe, let's go live on, social media on Facebook. I said, well, you know what? If I set up Facebook, we might as well set up Instagram too. So we have a husband and wife arguing moment. We don't need to do all that.
He be doing the most.
And so next thing you know, we finally get it all, set up. And I'm thinking she's about to talk about the new album, because I think we, discussed Generations or a new song or something. No, she started singing this crazy song out of nowhere. Why don't you just sit on down? Just freestyling. And one of our mutual buddies, mutual colleagues, musician friends, vocalists, was on Instagram, said, "Hey, you need to make this a challenge." And we like, a challenge? Like, we never did this before. What you mean?
Mm.
So we make the song a challenge while we're working on Generations. The challenge totally takes off, and a buddy of ours that tours with Gregory Porter ended up putting some music underneath a whole thing. And Gene and I, we listened back to it. We said, okay, his name is Andre J. Pevek, and he was quarantined in Czech Republic.
Wow.
And so I'm listening. I'm like, okay, Gene, that's possibly something there. But I'm like, oh my God, but we're working on this album. And we just said, you know what, let's just put the song out. We put the song out. First of all, the whole challenge went viral. And everybody submitted their own videos. And then the song got released, and it just started. You know, we did what we call a quarantine photo shoot, held up our iPhones. We just did a video bootleg holding the phone, and next thing you know, the fast forward, the Grammy nominations come out, and they say Cinema nominated. So you talk about timing.
Your third Grammy nomination, which is incredible. That is just phenomenal. That's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean,
it's been a blessed
journey.
I
mean, because we argued even about that. It sounds like we argue a
lot.
We really don't argue that much. But when we do, because we argue over this stuff, because I was like, babe, I'm tired. We just want, can we please just drop the album in 2022?
Yeah, 2022.
Remember I said that? Did say that? I was trying to do 2022.
God, but I want to do 2020. So now I just got what we wanted.
And then you said, okay, we compromised and decided to drop it Juneteenth weekend.
Wow.
So it all came together.
Their critically acclaimed album Generations not only placed high on year-end jazz charts, it earned them their 4th Grammy nomination. Career milestones to follow included signing their independent label Be a Light to a distribution deal with Motown Gospel, and earning an NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Jazz Album Vocal.
Image Awards, I think, is particularly honorable because they honor, it's not just about, you know, who's famous, who's this, but they honor people who are doing things in the community, people that are really making positive impacts, people that we may not know about, like, you know, just in addition to the arts and entertainment world, but other areas of life like teachers and different things like that. So it kind of puts you in that space where, wow, okay, you know, and anytime you're being honored by your community in that way and nominated, you know, it's just a certain feeling that you can't really replace.
What would your advice be to creatives during this time that just kind of feeling a little let down? Like, how do I keep going? Especially, for instance, they have a record that maybe they were coming out with, you know, or had a tour that they were about to embark on, you know, or certain things like that. How would you?
You know, it's interesting because, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, we've had a lot of wonderful blessings in the past, you know, few years this year, you know, 2020 and 21, 22. So it's been a good couple of years for us. At the same time, we felt some of that frustration because, you know, we were like getting ready to, you know, bust out with more shows and, you know, more territories for touring, and it just didn't happen. So it's like you're trying to put your best efforts forward to build, but then it's like, you know, we can't do anything about COVID. We just have to wait it out, you know. So just trying to get in a balanced headspace, to just be, whether you're home a lot or whether you're starting to move out more, just try to do whatever it is that you need to do as an individual to get in a balanced headspace so that you can create, you know. That's one thing on the creative side.
I think the thing that keeps you going is understanding your purpose. And if it's your purpose, then I think not that you don't want to quit each day sometimes, you know, when things get tough, but I think it just has to deal with your, you know, your purpose and your calling. And I think, again, it's one of those things where you got to know when to take a break for mental health. But the main thing is back to being persistent and being consistent.
I'm Toya Haynes for PhillyCAM Voices.
Let the sun shine on your face.
Our next segment is on the importance of the 2022 midterm elections and how the results of these midterms will determine the future of our state as well as our country, as well as whether our country remains a democracy or turns into a dictatorship. I interviewed State Senator Anthony Williams to get his views regarding the election landscape and the consequences of not mobilizing a huge Democratic voter turnout this year. From redcoats to red hats, the 2022 election will most likely be one of the most important elections of our lives. It will determine if the American experiment of democracy lives or dies. Michelle Obama said, "We've got to vote like the future of our democracy depends upon it, because our voting rights are under attack." Mitch McConnell doesn't believe African American voters are Americans. Here's what he had to say.
African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans.
I had a conversation with Pennsylvania State Senator Anthony Williams about why the 2022 election is critical. This could determine if we have democracy or dictatorship. I asked, what do you think would happen if the Republicans take power in 2022?
That is a scary proposition. Based upon the new Republican Party, this new Republican Party is now debating who's an American and who's not. And this new Republican Party is now defining certain Americans are more valued than other Americans. This Republican Party is very, very, very much designed to not even going backwards. People would say this is going backwards. This is something that harkens back to any authoritarian government, dictatorship, if you will, that has been the demise of every country in the world. That's where we are headed if this new Republican Party gets to take over.
I asked Senator Williams what he thought would happen regarding our voting rights and the right to have our vote counted if the next Pennsylvania governor was a Republican.
Clearly, the consequence of that would be that significant portions of Pennsylvania would not have the opportunity to vote. And the consequence of that is that you would have the optics of a democratically elected governor and general assembly.
What about this idea that, like, if they get their way, they can audit votes and say, "Oh, we don't like the way this went. We want it to go our way." So
that's called a rigged election. That's called a rigged election. I mean, that's what your children do when they don't get their way. They have a temper tantrum. They scream and they shout until you say, "Okay, I'll give you what you want." That has nothing to do with the history of this country. I mean, literally, the history of this country, as far back as its creation, we've never done that. Democrat, Republican, whatever party was created, this would be a first time in this nation's history that we are actually turning our back on what we created as a nation.
Since Biden has been president, economic policies have been enacted that helped, like you said, working families that have benefited from these economic policies, and they're not giving the money they got from the government back, but they're claiming to be cultural warriors, and they're going to vote against things like teaching critical race theory in the schools, and they just bring these things up. What do you think can be done to get these cultural warriors to see that the country is at stake in the upcoming elections?
Some of those people you'll never get because, they're closet bigots. Oh no, no, I don't have, no, yeah, you are. And so you're never going to get them back. So I think, and ironically enough, talking about democracy doesn't seem to be resonating with people in the way that you would hope it and think it to be.
What would you say to citizens if they asked, why should they go and vote?
The house is on fire. You just don't know it. it's smoldering in the basement. The smoke is kind of coming up and percolating. But as in most fires, it won't be the fire that gets you, it will be the smoke that kills you. And if the foundation of a democracy is at risk, you can be sure the foundation of our liberty as Black people in this country is at risk or at peril. And so this is a smoldering fire that is a crisis that people just don't feel the heat yet. And unfortunately, sometimes people don't feel the heat till something actually happens. And then when something happens, then people want to react. We don't have the luxury to wait till something actually happens. We have to actually do something now.
We'll call them the new Republican Party. They're running around claiming they're the patriots, trying to bully people into believing what they believe. They're even saying that, I've seen it, when can we start shooting people who don't agree with us? I believe they will do it. They're not patriots. They're acting against the what's in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. They're doing the opposite. Right. So what can Democrats do to get people to see, look, these people are a real danger to our country?
I'm not sure that when you just said, about people shooting one another, I'm not quite sure that people quite get there's a desire for an element within that party to literally have a civil war. And they're not shy about it anymore. They're like organizing to get to that end. I truly believe that the insurrection on January the 6th was that. We saw the first attempt to attack government. Now, the large majority, even those folks who are affiliated, don't want to go to the end that they saw on January 6th. So we have to keep pushing to make sure even people in that crowd know this is who you're hanging with. This is their end game. And if you're not aligned with it, you can be in the building and guess what? They will take you out back and shoot you in the head too, because you're not okay with what they're saying.
Do you have any final thoughts for our viewers regarding the 2022 election?
Vote, 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 vote. And look, most of us talk to voters. We got to talk to non-voters. But it only gets better by your participation, not lack thereof. So for anyone who is on here or listening, I'm not talking really to you because you're going to be engaged. I'm talking to those people who say they're not engaged and they complain about it and don't realize their complaint only gives license to those people who want to make it worse for you, because they are going to vote, because they know that if they vote, they can take over and control the process. So you have to vote and then keep complaining about it getting better. There's a significant portion of America which is now called themselves independents. And most elections depend upon them. And so I do speak a lot to them about the pragmatic part of getting things done. But certainly those who are violent and attacking the Constitution and wrapping themselves in a flag are reprehensible and hypocritical and disingenuous and dishonest about their value structure, because it's not American. It's nothing that we've ever seen before. And we need to push back and fight against that strongly.
This is Connie Komm for PhillyCAM Voices. I'm in the studio. In the studio tonight with us, we have Vic Walczak. Vic has been overseeing litigation statewide as a legal director at the ACLU of Pennsylvania since 2004. He has personally handled many nationally significant cases. In 2020, Walczak led the ACLU PA's litigation defending democracy, participating in more than half of the 30 lawsuits in Pennsylvania to preserve voters' rights. Welcome to the program, Vic.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, Connie. Sorry, I should know how to unmute by this point in the pandemic. Sorry.
That's okay. But I'd just like to start out our conversation with the issues surrounding mail-in voting. There's a lot of confusion around what it is and what it isn't in the legal arena, along with whether or not it's a reliable way to cast your vote. Can you talk to us about this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, people have been voting by mail in this country for over 100 years. I mean, going back to the Civil War, and you think about people who serve in the armed forces, whether they're away from home in this country or especially if they're overseas. I mean, these are not people that you want to disenfranchise. And so, there's been provision for armed services members to vote by mail for a very long time. That has been expanded significantly in the last decades. In many states, everybody votes by mail, either by mail or online. Pennsylvania has been one of the more restrictive states. And so until 2019, the only way you could vote by mail is if you are in the military or if you essentially had a doctor's note saying that you couldn't get to a polling place, or you signed an affidavit saying that you're going to be away from the jurisdiction because of work. But, for other reasons, if you just felt like it, it was inconvenient, whatever, you couldn't vote by mail. And then in 2019, the legislature overwhelmingly passed something called Act 77, which expanded mail voting to anybody and everybody. Right? You did not have to have any kind of particular excuse. If you wanted to vote by mail, you could do that. And it turned out to be critically important because everybody knows what happened in March of 2020. We got hit with this pandemic. There was an awful lot of people who didn't want to, who were vulnerable, who were afraid, legitimately afraid to go to the polls. And in 2020, in Pennsylvania, we had almost 2.7 million voters vote in some fashion by mail. And that's out of about 7 million total voters. It is safe, it is secure, and it is easy.
Now, Philadelphia, we are a multicultural and multilingual city. What kind of services and protections are there currently in place to ensure that non-English speaking citizens can freely participate in their right to vote? And are there any concerns that you have regarding this issue specifically?
Yeah, so under the Federal Voting Rights Act, or what's left of it after the Supreme Court has been taking a sledgehammer to the protections for the last decade or so, Pennsylvania has 3 counties that are called Section 203, which means that they've got enough people who are, whose primary language is other than English. And they are required to provide all services in that other language. And the 3 counties are Lehigh and Berks, which have to provide services in Spanish. Philadelphia is not only Spanish, but also Chinese. That's a new designation as a result of the last census. And what that means is that those 3 counties are required essentially to provide all services in not just English, but in Spanish, and also in Philadelphia in Chinese. And I got to say that at this point, we're still looking at what the counties are doing. In the past, they have not done everything that's required of them under the law. So for instance, they need to, all directions, things on the website, they need to translate into these other languages. They need to set up a helpline on election day where people can call and speak in that language. Ballots have to be translated. And in the past, that has not been fully done. So at this point, the ACLU, working with a number of allies, we're kind of canvassing what these counties are doing it, comparing it to what the law requires, and we'll politely ask them to make sure that that is happening. And if it's not done, then there is obviously the option of going to court, which is something that we're prepared to do.
Okay. And I read your article regarding voting and how the Republicans want to subpoena the personal, private, identifiable information of every person in the state that voted in the 2020 election. What kind of information are they asking for? Why do they want this information? And look, Vic, it's now 2022. Isn't it time to move on from 2020?
No, I would say to that last question, it's both time to move on and not time to move on. I think there needs to be a reckoning and an accounting of what happened in January of 2021, notably on January the 6th. I think there also needs to be a national dialogue about how the 2020 election was the largest we've ever had, but also the most secure and probably the least number of problems. And what we're seeing here in Pennsylvania with this subpoena that you reference, right? It's being pushed by just a handful of Republican senators on a committee that has no jurisdiction over voting. And the only reason they're doing that is to try to create uncertainty in people's minds about the integrity of elections. I mean, this is all about delegitimizing elections so that then they can say, oh, there was a problem with the election, and then they can replace the will of the voters with who they want to be elected. I mean, this is what Senator Williams was talking about. It is a critical issue. It is a real threat to our democracy. The details of this subpoena that they are asking the Secretary of State to turn over is not only just the information that is in your voter registration list, like your address, your party of registration, your date of birth, but they also want the critical data that you provide to prevent like some kind of fraud. So that includes your driver's license number and the last 4 digits of your social security number. And anybody will tell you that if that information gets out, there is a huge amount of mischief that can be done, whether it's some kind of identity theft or financial fraud, or they could actually use that information to vote in your place. I mean, it's a way to really delegitimize elections. And you say, why do they want this? We've been asking that question since September, and we still haven't gotten a clear answer on why they need that particular information. But this is a very dangerous effort. The ACLU is in court on behalf of 8 voters, the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, Make the Road, trying to prevent the committee from eventually accessing all this really important personal information.
Thank you for that. Now, there are a lot of concerns regarding the current trends we're seeing in terms of changing the voting laws. And we don't have a lot of time, but can you describe succinctly this situation to us and let us know what about this concerns you and also how it relates to the work the ACLU is doing?
Yeah, I mean, all of it concerns me. There are more problems in other states because Governor Wolf has either blocked or threatened to block some of the more serious efforts to make it. So it's basically making it harder to vote, trying to sort of sow distrust in the elections. And ultimately, the most dangerous one is to take away democracy. Is like if Senator Williams was saying, if you don't like the results of the election, the legislature, which is controlled by the Republicans, are going to be able to come in and say, hey, we don't like the results. We think there was a problem. We're going to say that our guy won. And it is a huge problem all across the country, including in Pennsylvania.
Okay. And well, I really appreciate you, Vic, coming on to share all this information. And I also want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode. Look out next month for more stories from our community reporting fellows. And you can also watch our show on YouTube and Roku and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. So we'll see you next time.